Alright, so picking up to the end of the last chapter, where we saw Kamiizumi open the Gate of Celestial Awakening, we're seeing his disciple Marume and Shibata talking over about what it actually means to open it, and Marume gives us the gist of it. He says the doorway to martial consciousness which Sensei had reached, and this also means Kamiizumi's recognized Hino as a valid opponent. And getting back to the fight, Hino is still wondering how he dodged his kick from the last chapter, and admits he meant to finish the fight with that kick alone. But then he gets right back to the fight here. Hino just lunges himself forward at Kamiizumi, and it looks like he's trying to hit him with a palm strike here, but right before he could touch him, we're hearing what Kamiizumi's thinking in this moment. He says, "You're quick, my boy. You could hardly be called human yourself." But not only does Kamiizumi dodge this attack, he then counters it by simply using the back end of his sword to somehow send Hino just flying backwards here. He says, "Much appreciated, allow me to use your speed." And he ends up crashing into the steel cage, and you can even see Mori's right behind where Hino lands. I love this little detail we get there, and everyone is just in shock. Kamiizumi just looks at him and says, "What do you think? Martial arts is pretty fun, isn't it?" But then we get some thoughts from Yagyu here, and what he says next is really interesting. He says that thrust just now was loaded with both his own weight and his foes, an application of the Fa-Jin of continental martial arts. However, even that is but a trivial technique for Ise no Kami now. So in other words, Kamiizumi is just barely trying still, but we do know he recognizes Hino as a threat, so it isn't that he doesn't take Hino seriously. He's just not been pushed yet into a corner to where he has to fight using his maximum potential. And that's pretty insane to think about, since we just saw Hino admit to trying to finish the fight with that one kick we saw him use in the last chapter. And even by the end of this chapter, Kamiizumi doesn't look the least bit concerned, so it's just hard for me to imagine if Hino could push him that far. It's like the story's been building Kamiizumi up as untouchable at this point. So then we're cutting over to Kamiizumi's backstory now, and for the most part, this is probably one of the more simpler backstories we've gotten so far, right? And it starts with him a lot younger here. We find out that he was born into a family of swordsmen, and it's after one of his teachers explains to him about the secret of obtaining this ultimate technique that he decides to commit his entire life to reaching that peak. And we get some really cool narration here. It says, "Kamiizumi's outstanding genius and resolution to be the strongest overpowered all other martial artists. Before age 30, he mastered 3 different styles and established Shingake Ryu." So we know he's the master and founder of Shingake Ryu, but we also know he was Yagyu and Hozuin's teacher as well. But it doesn't end there, because if you go all the way back to chapter 1, when we first saw all the fighters revealed for Tenkaichi, you'll notice there's also one more fighter who uses the Shingake Ryu fighting style, and that's Ogusuwara, the one who's supposed to fight against Ito Itosai. So you can just see how far his influence reaches, because there's already 3 other fighters who learn to use the sword according to his techniques. And then we're seeing him at 60 years old. It's now been 30 years later, and he's still been chasing after this ultimate technique. We're seeing him deflect this arrow with this sword while yawning and sitting down, and the rest of his students just clap and call him incredible. But that same night, we see him in private starting to go crazy. He says, "Incredible, that was dreadful, utterly dreadful. That will make my sword divine. Reaction, speed, agility, they're all within the realm of man. What must I do to reach them? The gods." So then we're seeing him just abandon the sword entirely and devote himself to meditation for 10 years. And this is crazy, because this would mean he's 70 years old now, right? But when we see Marume approach him by the mountain, the narration says the year is 1577, but we know that the tournament is taking place in the year 1600, so there's a 23-year gap between everything that happens with Kamiizumi here on the mountain and the fight he's having now with Hino, which means he is literally 93 years old in the current timeline. And right as Marume is trying to bring him down from the mountain, Kamiizumi is just barely able to talk here. He says, "In a little bit, the gate is just up ahead." And then suddenly we're getting to this big part of his backstory. His heart just somehow stops beating, and we see this glare of light shining down on him, and he goes into this trance-like state, I think, right? I actually have no idea what I'm really looking at here. It's visually comparable to what I would imagine a psychedelic experience would be like, but when we see him come out of it, he says, "The gate has opened. I'm certain I could feel it there. The power of the gods, the laws of the universe which gave way to the essence of martial arts. So it's kinda like Garo after he unlocked the monster Calamity Godslayer fist, right? Where he just has unlimited access to all martial arts, but it turns out he actually died the moment he gained all of this wisdom. And this could really help explain why he could still fight this well at 93 years old, because he even has control over his own heartbeat. So then we're getting back to the fight here, and we're seeing Hino look pretty calm after what just happened to him, right? And he tries to understand how exactly Kamiizumi was able to do this. He says, so I guess that means there's some kind of principle for sending my own power back to me. Manipulating the flow of power is the law of martial arts. And I love what he says next here. He says, so basically you sense the flow of power and get into the flow when the timing's right. I just gotta give it a little boost and change it, right? Why don't I give it a spin? So he's essentially trying to hack into Kamiizumi's technique by dumbing it down so that pretty much anyone can do it, but I really doubt it's that simple, right? I mean, Kamiizumi did nothing but meditate for 10 years to gain this technique, so I can see things getting worse for Hino if he tries to fight any differently, but then we're seeing him take this stance on one leg. He says, sure, I can't do it just like you, but you really shouldn't knock me, Bushin-san, they call me a god too. And using a high kick called the Divine Dancing Blade Kama Itachi, he straight up just sends a gush of wind at Kamiizumi like it's sharp enough to cut him. And coming to the end of the chapter, we see him dodge the attack in time, but it actually ends up cutting the sheath of his sword in half, ultimately forcing Kamiizumi to use his sword now at this point, right? And then Hino says, guess you could say that's more or less my own katana, now let's have a real sword fight. So I don't really know how long this fight is supposed to continue on for, right? Like, I would imagine it'll take 2 more chapters max, or who knows? It could really end in the next chapter, but if I had to place a bet, I would just have to pick Kamiizumi here, but if it ends up being Hino, I wouldn't be too mad about that either. I just hope the ending to this is convincing enough for either side, because this is definitely becoming my favorite fight in the manga so far. But this is where I'm gonna end the video with, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I know this video was a long time coming if you were waiting on it, so I really do apologize. I was just unaware this chapter was even translated, and it just came at a bad time, so believe me, this will not happen again. I'll be sure to be on time for the next one. But before I end the video, I just want to give a very special thanks to the channel's patrons: Iron, Justin, Nix EXP, Paranormal Beluga, Jedi Knight 104, Pedyuko, and Malekith. I can't say it enough, guys. Thank you so much for the support, and for anyone else who's interested, you can sign up too and get into the monthly Q&A I do here on the channel. I'll be posting the next one up sometime at the start of November, so from now until the end of October, feel free to consider joining. You would also be helping me out a lot here in a massive way and get a special shout out like this in every single video. The link will be in the description below, or you could just search it yourself at patreon.com/Izanami. But other than that, guys, again, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, feel free to comment down below what your thoughts are, anything you agreed or disagreed with. And if you're interested in more Tenkaichi, then make sure you subscribe. I'll be doing more here on the channel like always and on time. And yeah, have a great day.